Have you ever wondered why ancient people carved faces, shapes, and gods into stone, clay, and wood, objects that still seem to stare back at us across thousands of years? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the channel where we explore history's most mysterious artifacts and forgotten wonders. If you enjoy these journeys into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now let's begin. The mask that opened its eyes at midnight. In the humid dusk of western Nigeria, where the evenings stretch long and the land rests beneath the heavy hush of cicadas, there lingers a story whispered in slow voices. It is not a tale carried in books, nor one spoken aloud in crowded places. It belongs instead to the edges of firesides, to the places where sleep presses on the eyelids, but curiosity will not quite release its hold. The story concerns a mask, carved from wood so old it darkened like river stone, a mask of the Yoruba people, an Epa mask, and one that, so they say, once opened its eyes at midnight. To speak of this story, we must first step softly into the lives of those who made such masks. Among the Yoruba, the Epa festival is more than performance. It is more than dance, more than spectacle. It is a communion of the living with the ancestral, a way for the present to brush its fingertips against the eternal. The masks are large, often towering above the dancer's head, heavy enough that to carry them is a test of endurance, yet graceful in their meaning. They represent fertility, community, leadership, and the spirits who linger unseen. They are Janus masks, often bearing two faces, one turned toward the living, one toward the dead, one toward the future, and one toward the past. In them duality takes form. Imagine such a mask, lifted onto the head of a dancer, its carved eyes staring into the daylight, its wooden mouth frozen in silence. It is not a face but a reminder of many faces. It is both human and more than human, a vessel. The dancer sweats beneath its weight, his body bending and turning, his breath echoing through the hollow inside. The crowd around him claps, chants, beats drums in steady time. They see the wood, but they also see something else, something beyond. For the Yoruba, these masks are alive when used, infused by the presence of ancestors and spirits who travel, briefly, through the world of the living. But the mask that concerns us now was different. Its weight was the same, its size no greater than the others, but whispers began that one of its eyes, carved deep and shadowed, never seemed to close, that at midnight, when the air fell still and the night pressed in, it would glisten, just faintly, as though wet. Some said they had seen it blink. It is easy, perhaps, to dismiss such stories. Wood does not blink. Darkness plays tricks on tired minds. Torchlight flickers, shadows shift, and yet the tale persisted, passing from elder to child, from one season to the next, gathering not urgency but a slow, hushed weight. The mask, carved in the likeness of a Janus face, seemed to hold something more than memory. One side gazed forward, serene and calm. The other side, the one turned slightly askew, bore the eye that would not rest. The first to notice had been a night guard in the compound of a chief. He walked his rounds, carrying his staff, moving with the slow rhythm of someone used to long nights. Inside the shrine house where the masks were kept, he felt a stirring, like the brush of wind, though no doors were open. He leaned close, peered through the narrow gap, and saw, or thought he saw, the faintest motion, a lid lowering, a lid rising. The mask's gaze fixed not on him, but on the space just beside him, as though watching something he could not see. He told no one at first, for who would believe? But the mind does not easily rest when it has seen what it should not. Days later, he spoke of it, and once spoken, the story grew legs. It crossed the compound walls, moved into the town, and from there outward. With every retelling, the detail deepened, the glisten of the eye, the certainty of its motion, the uncanny sense that it was aware, and always, the same time, midnight, when the day folded over into something liminal, neither old nor new, but suspended. Why midnight? The Yoruba are a people attentive to thresholds, the line between living and dead, between waking and dreaming, between the village and the wilderness. Midnight is another such boundary, a hinge between hours. If ancestors walk at dawn and dusk, perhaps something else stirs at the dark middle, where one day surrenders to another. Perhaps the mask, with its dual face, was caught eternally between states, never sleeping, always watching. The carver's name has been lost. Some say he was a master, others that he was troubled, touched by visions. The wood he used was iroko, sacred, heavy, a tree believed to house spirits of its own. Carvers approached such trees with offerings before ever touching blade to bark. To take wood from an iroko without respect was to invite haunting. And so whispers gathered. Maybe the carver asked, but not enough. Maybe he took, and the tree refused to forget. The mask, then, might carry not just the ancestors but the restless gaze of the iroko itself, a being who would not be silenced. Over time, the mask was brought out only rarely. Dancers struggled beneath its weight. Some claimed it seemed heavier than it should be, as though resisting movement. Others said it tilted of its own accord, forcing the dancer to shift, to stumble, to bow. No one could agree, and yet no one wished to test it too often. It was returned to the shrine, left among the other masks, sleeping, or appearing to. But always, the stories returned to the eye. A traveler once lodged near the shrine, and unable to sleep, sat listening to the night. The insects hummed, the air was thick, and the distant drumming of another village carried across the dark. At the stroke of midnight, he heard a faint click, like wood flexing. He looked toward the shrine house, and though the door was closed, a sliver of moonlight fell just right to catch a single eye through the narrow crack. And in that instant, he swore it gleamed, as if moist, as if alive. He fled the next morning, leaving behind his goods, unwilling to pass another night so close. These stories were never told with fear, not exactly, more with a tone of awe, of caution. The Yoruba are no strangers to mystery, to the presence of spirit in the world. What unsettled was not the idea of life in the mask, but the question of what kind of life it held. Ancestors, yes, but also something else, something that resisted closure, that refused to turn away. The elders taught that masks should rest when not in use. Their eyes closed, their silence complete. To leave one lingering was to leave the door ajar. And so the mask that opened its eye at midnight was troubling, not because it was alive, but because it would not rest. It watched ceaselessly, even when all others turned away. Over generations, the mask passed through hands, from shrine to shrine, from festival to storage. Some sought to destroy it, to burn it. But the fire caught slow, reluctant, as though the wood itself resisted. Others sought to bury it, but the ground would not keep it dry. In time, it was placed in the keeping of a small shrine at the edge of a village. Rarely visited, its story fading into the kind of legend that only old men recall, shaking their heads, smiling faintly at what they once believed. Yet even in modern days, when the mask at last left its land, carried across seas, placed behind the glass of a museum far from the soil that birthed it, the whispers did not still. Night guards in quiet corridors, alone with the hush of closed galleries, spoke in soft tones of unease. They would not name it directly, but they gestured to the case, to the mask within, and muttered of shadows that shifted. And always, if pressed, they named the same hour, midnight. And so the story lingers, half history, half haunting, inseparable. It begins with the Yoruba, with their ceremonies, their reverence for ancestors, their artistry in wood. But it deepens into the space where explanation thins, where something uncanny takes root. Perhaps the mask's eye never closed because it was carved that way. Perhaps torchlight and moonlight conspired to play tricks on watchers. Or perhaps, as those who tell the story still insist, there is some gaze that never truly rests, some spirit who, having been called into the wood, chose never to leave. And in this way, the mask becomes not only artifact but presence, one eye open, always, waiting at the threshold between day and night, between silence and speech, between what is carved and what is alive. The Venus of Willendorf. Have you ever stood before something so small, so delicate, that it felt almost impossible it had survived across the vastness of human time? A single object, able to speak across tens of thousands of years, not in words, but in silence, through its curves, its shape, its mystery. This is the story of the Venus of Willendorf, a figurine no larger than the palm of a hand, yet one of the most powerful windows into who we once were, and perhaps who we have always been. Discovered in 1908, near the quiet banks of the Danube River in Austria, this tiny limestone carving dates back more than 25,000 years, into the heart of the Upper Paleolithic. At first glance, it is simple. A woman's body, full and rounded, with exaggerated hips, breasts and belly, and a face entirely hidden by a pattern of carved lines, like braided hair, or perhaps a woven headdress. But beneath that simplicity lies one of the deepest riddles of human history. Was this small figurine a goddess of fertility? A charm for safe births in an age when every pregnancy was perilous? Was it a representation of abundance, of survival against the cold harshness of the Ice Age? Or was it something else entirely, an image we cannot begin to fully understand because it comes from a mind shaped in a world so far removed from ours? And yet, when you look at her, the Venus of Willendorf feels strangely familiar, because what she embodies, life, survival, the dream of continuity, is something we still carry inside us. So tonight, let us drift slowly into her world. Let us walk backwards into time, to the Paleolithic where fire crackled in caves, where survival depended on memory, and where small hands carved meaning into stone. Let us imagine how the Venus came to be, and what secrets she might still hold. The Danube Valley where she was found would not have looked the way it does today. 25 millennia ago, the climate was gripped by the Ice Age. Glaciers pressed down over much of Europe, cold winds swept across open steppes, and forests were sparse and scattered. Herds of mammoth, bison, and reindeer roamed the plains, and human groups, small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, moved with them. It was in this world that the Venus was born, a single piece of oolitic limestone not native to the valley where it was found, suggesting it had been carried there, perhaps across long distances. Someone, somewhere, chose this stone, held it, and began to carve. The details of its making are astonishing when you imagine them slowly, a sharp flint tool pressing again and again into the stone's surface, each groove shaping the swell of a hip, the curve of a breast, the pattern across the head. The person who carved her did so with focus and intent. Perhaps it was done by the firelight in a cave. Perhaps it was worked in daylight, with others watching. We will never know, but what we do know is that the figurine was not left unfinished. It was smoothed, detailed, made complete. And in her completion, she carried meaning. But what meaning? Archaeologists gave her the name Venus in the early 20th century, echoing the Roman goddess of love and beauty. The name was never meant to be exact. It was a kind of shorthand, a way of saying, this is a figure of a woman, associated perhaps with fertility. But of course, the people who made her knew nothing of Venus, nothing of Rome, nothing of the centuries that would come. What they knew was survival. What they knew was the cycle of life and death, hunger and plenty, cold and warmth. And so, some believe, the figurine was a symbol of fertility. Her rounded body was no accident. In an Ice Age world where food was never guaranteed, body fat was a sign of survival, of health, of life continuing. The Venus is not thin. She is not fragile. She is abundant, and abundance is what her people would have prayed for. Imagine being a woman in that time. To carry life inside you was to risk death. To give birth was to step into danger, with no medicine, no certainty. Perhaps such figurines were carved to protect, to invoke powers greater than the self. To whisper silently, let this child be born safe, let this family endure. And yet the Venus of Willendorf is not the only one of her kind. Across Europe, from France to Russia, from Italy to Germany, more than 200 similar figurines have been found, all dating from the Upper Paleolithic. They are called Venus figurines, though each one is unique. Some are tall and slender, others small and heavy. Some have faces, others are blank. Some were painted, some left plain. This shared style across such distances suggests something profound, a cultural thread, a shared belief or practice that stretched across thousands of miles and thousands of years. The Venus of Willendorf is one of the most famous, but she is not alone. She is part of a chorus of voices, all echoing the same idea, that the human body, especially the female body, was sacred. But here is where the mystery deepens. Because not everyone agrees with the fertility theory, some suggest the figurine might not represent a goddess at all, but a self-portrait. Imagine a woman looking down at her own body, carving what she sees from her perspective. In such a view, the enlarged breasts and belly are not exaggerated. They are simply what one sees when looking down at oneself. The hidden face could be because she could not see her own features. Others suggest the figurine was not spiritual but practical, a teaching tool, a model for explaining pregnancy and birth. And still others wonder if it was not about women at all, but about the community's idea of survival, or even an early form of storytelling, an object passed from hand to hand to remind people of their shared purpose. What we cannot do is be certain, because the makers left us no words, no inscriptions. The Venus does not come with instructions. She simply exists, as she has always existed, in silence, and that silence is part of her power, because into that silence we pour our imagination. Picture her in use. Perhaps she was carried as a talisman, tucked into a pouch, held in the palm of the hand. Perhaps she sat by a fire, as stories were told. Perhaps she was buried with someone, meant to guide them into the next world. The Venus of Willendorf was indeed buried. When she was discovered in 1908, she was found in layers of soil, untouched for thousands of years. Why was she placed there? Was she hidden deliberately? Was she left behind when her people moved on? Did she fall, and was never retrieved? Every answer only leads to another question. And yet, for all the mystery, the Venus of Willendorf is deeply human. When you stand before her in the museum in Vienna today, it is impossible not to feel her presence. She is tiny, just 11 centimeters tall, and yet she feels monumental. People stop and stare at her, not because of her size, but because she seems alive. She embodies something primal, something we recognize, even if we cannot name it. Life, continuity, the hope that the future will exist. As we drift deeper into the story, let us imagine the world she came from. The Ice Age winds, the smell of firewood and smoke, the crunch of snow underfoot, the calls of reindeer across the plain, and in a cave, or under the open sky, someone carving her shape, a gift to the future. That hand is gone now, the people are gone, their words, their names, their entire world has vanished, and yet the Venus remains. She has survived wars, floods, and the slow erosion of time. She has outlasted empires, kings, and nations, and still she stands, a small stone body, speaking without words. Perhaps that is her final message, that even when the world changes, when everything falls away, what remains is the human desire to create, to take a piece of stone and carve meaning into it, to leave behind something that says, "We were here." The Venus of Willendorf is not just a relic of the Paleolithic. She is a mirror. She reflects back at us the fact that we too are creators, that we too are storytellers, that what we leave behind will one day be looked upon with the same mixture of wonder and confusion. And so, as you drift now into rest, let the image of her linger in your mind, a small figure, carved by ancient hands, carrying across the gulf of time. She is not just stone, she is a memory of us all, silent, enduring, eternal. The mirror that refused to show a face. In the quiet folds of Japanese legend, tucked deep within the fabric of myth and history, there is said to be a mirror that does not always show what it should. It is the Yata no Kagami, the eight-sided mirror, one of the most sacred treasures of Japan. It is not simply an object, but a relic said to embody truth itself, an artifact so ancient that emperors bowed before it, priests guarded it with their lives, and myths wrapped it in layers of awe and fear. Yet beneath the reverent tales lies another, whispered more softly, the story that sometimes, when one dares to look upon it, no reflection comes back at all. Imagine for a moment standing before a mirror that refuses you. You lean forward expecting to see your face, your outline, the certainty of yourself. But in that polished depth nothing looks back. You are absent, erased. A chill slides down your skin because a mirror should never lie. And yet here perhaps is a mirror that tells a truth you may not wish to hear. The Yata no Kagami has always held this paradox. In Shinto mythology, it is not just polished bronze but the very symbol of honesty, clarity, and the divine. It is the mirror said to have lured the sun goddess Amaterasu from her self-imposed exile in a cave, returning light to a darkened world. The gods placed the shining mirror at the mouth of the cavern, and when Amaterasu stepped out, she was captivated by her own reflection. But was it really her reflection she saw, or something deeper, something that showed her what words could not? The story is ancient, older than the emperors who claimed descent from the goddess herself. In every retelling, the mirror gleams, and Amaterasu emerges. Yet what lingers is not only the myth of light restored, but the sense that this mirror is no ordinary surface. It is an object that both reveals and withholds. And as centuries passed, as shrines rose around it, and emperors made their pilgrimages, whispers crept in, the suggestion that not every reflection shown by the Yata no Kagami was true. Some claimed that if your heart was false, if your words hid deceit, the mirror would strip you away, not in fire or punishment, but in absence. You would lean forward, searching for your features, and the mirror would not grant them. It was not blindness, but refusal. It saw you, and chose not to show you. In the imperial regalia of Japan, there are three sacred treasures: the sword Kusanagi, symbol of valor, the jewel Yasakani no Magatama, symbol of benevolence, and the mirror, Yata no Kagami, symbol of wisdom and honesty. Each one is wrapped in layers of reverence, hidden from public eyes. Even emperors do not look directly upon them. They are objects to be approached with bowed heads and whispered rites. Yet of the three, it is the mirror that remains the most enigmatic. Because mirrors are not passive, they do not simply exist, they answer back. And sometimes, the silence of an answer not given can be more unsettling than any vision. Pilgrims once told of standing in shrine halls, before replicas meant to remind them of the true mirror, locked away at Ise Grand Shrine. They would bow, they would pray, and then in the polished bronze of lesser mirrors, they might glimpse themselves as though through a haze. But a story lingers, that there were moments when the surface went utterly blank, not black, not distorted, just nothing, as if the mirror knew who was worthy of being seen, and who was not. Is it possible that the Yata no Kagami carries such power? Bronze mirrors in ancient Japan were never just practical tools. They were objects of ritual, shining discs that caught firelight, moonlight, sunlight, and seemed to drink them in. Archaeologists have unearthed mirrors from Kofun burial mounds, their surfaces etched with delicate patterns. They were placed beside the dead as guides, as companions into eternity. For to have a mirror was to hold a fragment of the sun, a polished truth that pierced shadow. And yet in these myths, there is always the sense that truth is not always comforting. To stand before the mirror was to ask it a question: who am I, truly? And the answer was not always one you might want. The story of reflections withheld gained strength across centuries. Priests murmured it in guarded tones. Some said that when the mirror turned away a reflection, it was not a punishment but a mercy, that it spared the person from seeing what they had become. Others said the opposite, that to vanish in the mirror was to be erased from Amaterasu's gaze, cut from the divine lineage of truth itself. A terrible silence, more frightening than death. Legends persist of courtiers and samurai who journeyed to shrines, expecting blessing, but found nothing waiting in the mirror's depth. A man might walk out pale, whispering that he had been denied, his face absent where it should have been. Some never returned to court. Some vanished into exile, carrying the unbearable weight of absence. The Yata no Kagami is never displayed. It rests within the sanctuary of Ise, wrapped, veiled, seen only by high priests. The people know it only through story, through distant ritual, and yet, perhaps this distance protects them. For what would it mean, to look upon a mirror that might deny you? The eerie edge of the tale lies in the way mirrors have always unsettled humanity. Across cultures, mirrors are thresholds. They reflect, but they also suggest other worlds, depths beyond the surface, faces that move a fraction slower than your own, eyes that seem to know too much. The Japanese word for mirror, kagami, itself carries hidden meaning. When written in characters, it can be divided: ka, spirit; ga, self; mi, see. To see the self is to see the spirit. But some point out that if you remove the middle character ga, the ego, you are left with kami, the word for God. In the mirror, one might glimpse the divine, or perhaps one might glimpse nothing at all. This idea that the mirror reveals truth when ego falls away is comforting to some, yet in the darker telling, it becomes chilling. For what if the self is not enough to be reflected? What if the mirror holds only gods, and you do not belong? There are stories, even in modern times, whispered by attendants and pilgrims, of standing before ancient shrine mirrors and feeling something strange, a shimmer, a pause, as though the surface were alive. A young woman once claimed she looked into a polished bronze offered at a rural shrine, only to find her eyes gone, erased, smooth skin where gaze should be. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and when she looked again, her reflection was whole. Was it a trick of the dim lamplight? Or was it a reminder, subtle but terrifying, that mirrors are never neutral? And always the legend circles back to the Yata no Kagami, the mirror of mirrors, hidden yet potent, guardian of Japan's oldest truth. If it truly can withhold reflections, then what does that say of us? Are we so sure we deserve to be seen? The silence of the mirror becomes more unsettling, the longer one thinks on it. For what is a person without reflection? In daily life, reflections tether us. They assure us that we exist, that we are solid. Without them, doubt creeps in. Perhaps the mirror is not refusing us. Perhaps it is showing us the deepest truth, that our sense of self is fragile, impermanent, not as certain as we believe. When night falls and the shrine's empty, one imagines the mirror resting in its chamber, veiled, wrapped, unseen, but not inert, waiting. It does not sleep. It does not forget. It is truth, polished into metal, gazing endlessly, whether anyone dares to meet it or not. And perhaps that is the real reason no emperor, no priest, no pilgrim looks directly into the Yata no Kagami, not out of reverence alone, but out of fear, that when the veil is lifted, when one finally stands before the sacred mirror, they may find that it does not recognize them, that their face does not belong in its truth, that the silence of absence is the only answer they receive. And so the mirror remains hidden, and the legend endures, a mirror that shines, a mirror that lured a goddess, a mirror that symbolizes truth, and sometimes refuses to show a face at all. In the end, it is left to us to wonder, if we stood before it, if the veil were lifted, and the mirror offered itself to our gaze, would we see ourselves looking back? Or would the mirror, ancient and unyielding, turn us into nothing, a silence deeper than reflection, a reminder that truth does not always need us to exist? The Yata no Kagami waits, as it always has, its polished surface guarding its secret, and perhaps it always will, hidden in shadow, holding within it the possibility of a reflection, or the refusal of one. The Terracotta Army. Beneath the rolling earth of central China, in the province of Shanxi, there lies a silent army. For more than 2,000 years, it waited unseen, sealed under the soil, its ranks endless, its purpose eternal. It was not until farmers digging a well in 1974 struck against hardened clay that the first glimpse of this army appeared, the face of a soldier, life-sized, staring blankly through the centuries. That moment would uncover what has since become one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history, the terracotta army of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. The story begins long before the clay warriors were shaped, fired, and buried. It begins in the chaotic centuries known as the Warring States period, when rival kingdoms fought endlessly across China. Out of that turmoil rose a ruler of extraordinary ambition, Ying Zheng, the king of Qin. Through conquest and ruthless determination, he would bring the fractured kingdoms together, declaring himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. His unification of China in 2021 BCE created an empire whose legacy still echoes in the very name China, drawn from Qin. Yet his vision of unity was not only for his lifetime. He sought eternity, permanence, and an unbroken reign that reached beyond death. Like many rulers of the ancient world, Qin Shi Huang was haunted by the impermanence of life. He feared death and hungered for immortality. His court became filled with alchemists and dreamers who promised elixirs, strange potions, and methods of cheating mortality. But where others dreamed of eternal life, the emperor built for eternal protection. His tomb, a sprawling necropolis, was designed not as a simple resting place, but as an empire beneath the earth, and within it, he demanded an army that would never tire, never disobey, and never fall, crafted not of flesh, but of clay. The terracotta army was born of this command. Over 700,000 laborers are believed to have worked on the project. It was not one tomb, but an entire subterranean city, stretching across more than 50 square kilometers. In its heart lay the emperor's mausoleum, yet around it, in ordered pits, his clay soldiers were stationed, as if guarding their ruler in death as they might have in life. When archaeologists entered the pits, they found themselves confronted by an astonishing sight. Thousands upon thousands of warriors arrayed in strict formation, lined in rows that seemed to march into eternity. Each soldier stood nearly as tall as a living man, averaging around 6 feet in height, their bodies armored, their expressions distinct. No two faces were identical. Some bore the heavy jaws of seasoned fighters, others narrow cheekbones or calm, youthful eyes. There were archers, infantrymen, charioteers, and generals. Horses, too, were sculpted in life-size detail, their flared nostrils and tense muscles frozen mid-movement, as if waiting for the signal to charge. The soldiers were more than statues. They were once painted in brilliant color, reds, purples, blues, and greens, that have long since faded or flaked away. To imagine the army as it originally stood is to imagine a sea of lifelike figures, vibrant as if alive, holding real weapons of bronze, spears, swords, and crossbows, their edges still sharp enough to cut after 2 millennia. This was no mere symbolic guard. It was a military in miniature, a faithful reflection of Qin's real army, meticulously replicated to accompany him into eternity. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Each figure was molded in parts, torsos, arms, heads, assembled, then individualized with hand-carved details. Scholars believe the faces may have been modeled on real soldiers, or perhaps they drew from an artistic template of human diversity. Their hairstyles, hats, and armor differ according to rank, reflecting the exact structure of the Qin military. Even the soles of their shoes were carved with patterns. The level of detail suggests not only imperial wealth, but also the emperor's obsession with control, an obsession so great he recreated his world underground, complete with bureaucracy, musicians, servants, acrobats, and animals, all sculpted from clay. The purpose of this subterranean empire was both practical and spiritual. To the ancient Chinese, the afterlife was not an escape from worldly concerns but a continuation. Just as a ruler needed guards and servants in life, he would need them in death. The terracotta army was not an offering but a necessity, ensuring Qin Shi Huang could maintain dominion over his realm, even when his body was gone. Yet the army is only part of the greater mystery. The emperor's tomb itself has never been opened. Historical records describe wonders and terrors sealed within, rivers of mercury flowing to mimic seas and oceans, a domed ceiling painted with stars, traps designed to deter intruders. The historian Sima Qin, writing a century later, claimed that crossbows were rigged to fire automatically at anyone who entered. Modern scientists, scanning the soil around the mausoleum, have indeed found unusually high levels of mercury, lending eerie credence to the ancient texts. Out of respect, fear, or caution, the central tomb remains untouched to this day. The emperor still lies undisturbed, guarded by his clay army. When the farmers stumbled upon the warriors in 1974, the discovery at first seemed small, a broken head, a fragment of clay. But as excavations widened, the scale became staggering. Pit 1 alone holds over 6,000 soldiers, lined in rectangular battle formation. Pit 2 contains cavalry units and chariots, arranged in complex flanking maneuvers. Pit 3, smaller, seems to be a command post, perhaps the staff headquarters of the underground army. Each pit reveals not randomness but precise military logic, as if the emperor's generals had planned his afterlife campaign with the same rigor as a real battlefield. The soldiers' weapons astonished archaeologists as much as their bodies. Bronze swords and spearheads were found sharp and untarnished, preserved by a chromium coating that seemed impossibly advanced for the 3rd century BCE. It was only in the 20th century that such preservation techniques were rediscovered. How Qin's artisans achieved it remains a subject of debate, fueling theories of lost technology or accidental genius. Beyond their technical brilliance, the warriors also reflect the emperor's darker side. To construct such a vast necropolis required immense human cost. Laborers worked in grueling conditions, many likely perished during construction. Some legends claim that workers who knew the secrets of the tomb were sealed inside to ensure silence. Whether true or not, the terracotta army is as much a monument to imperial ambition as it is to artistry, a reminder of the lengths to which rulers will go to defy mortality, And yet there is a haunting irony in the army's silence. For all its scale, the necropolis lay forgotten for centuries. Local farmers tilled fields above the soldiers without knowing what slumbered beneath their feet. Dynasties rose and fell, the Mongols swept across the land, cities crumbled and were rebuilt, and still the emperor's clay army remained hidden. Only chance brought it back to light, a well dug in the wrong place, a shard of history breaking the surface. Today, the terracotta army stands not as a weapon for Qin Shi Huang, but as a wonder for the world. Millions travel to Xi'an to walk among the soldiers, gazing into their stone-carved eyes, searching for the humanity of long-dead artisans who shaped each face. The figures no longer guard the emperor, but instead guard his memory, their silence speaking louder than any proclamation. The mystery lingers. Why did Qin Shi Huang believe so strongly in the power of clay to preserve his rule? Did he see the army as literal guardians, or as a symbolic gesture to heaven and earth? What lies inside the unopened tomb? Rivers of mercury, traps or treasures beyond imagination? Perhaps one day science will allow a safe exploration, but for now the emperor remains undisturbed, and his army remains vigilant. What is certain is that the terracotta army captures something deeply human: the refusal to let go, the desire to be remembered, the belief that with enough effort we can hold eternity in our hands. For all its grandeur, it reflects a truth that crosses cultures and centuries, that even the most powerful fear death, and in their fear, they create monuments that echo forever. The soldiers continue to stand, row upon row, not marching, not fighting, but waiting for orders that will never come, for a ruler who will never rise again. And in their stillness, they remind us of the strange ways in which the past survives, sometimes buried, sometimes broken, but always whispering through the silence of time. The Nefertiti bust, sculpted queen, lost to time. In the heart of Egypt, beneath the weight of desert sands and the endless turn of centuries, lies a story carved not in words but in stone, in pigment, in the delicate curve of a jawline frozen in time. The story of a queen who may have ruled, who may have guided an empire through upheaval, who may have vanished without trace, leaving behind only a single hauntingly perfect image, the bust of Nefertiti. Her name, Nefertiti, means the beautiful one has come. And when we gaze upon her likeness, discovered in the ruins of Amarna, it is difficult to resist the sense that beauty itself had indeed arrived, embodied in the serene face of a woman who was both mortal and somehow beyond mortality. This is the tale of the Nefertiti bust, an artifact both famous and mysterious, admired by millions, yet still guarding its secrets. Tonight, we will let the story unfold slowly, piece by piece, like the gentle removal of desert dust from fragile stone. We will begin in the Egypt of the 14th century BCE, a time of change, of religious revolution, and of a queen who stood beside a king, determined to rewrite the order of the cosmos itself. The world into which Nefertiti stepped was a world both old and eternal. Egypt had already been a kingdom for nearly 2,000 years when her name entered history. Its temples lined the Nile. Its priests upheld traditions that felt as ancient then as they do to us now. The gods of Egypt were countless, appearing as falcons and lions, crocodiles and ibises, each temple city thrumming with its own sacred identity. And yet, one pharaoh would decide that this order was not enough. His name was Akhenaten, though he was first called Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III. When he came to power, Egypt was stable, wealthy, confident in its gods and in its rulers. But Akhenaten was restless. He began to speak not of many gods but of one, not of temples filled with statues, but of a single divine force visible in the sky, the Aten, the radiant disk of the sun. It was a boldness, even a defiance, that shook the kingdom to its foundations. For if Aten was the sole god, then what of Amun, worshipped at Karnak? What of Horus, or Osiris, or Hathor? What of the vast priesthoods who had for centuries ensured Egypt's stability? Akhenaten pushed them aside. He built a new capital in the desert, away from Thebes, away from Memphis. He named it Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten, known to us today as Amarna. And beside him through it all, appearing in carvings, in reliefs, in shrines and stelae, was his queen, Nefertiti. She was not a shadow in his reign, nor merely an ornament. Instead she appeared as nearly equal. Where Akhenaten raised his hands to the Aten, so too did she. Where the rays of the sun stretched down, touching the royal family with tiny hands, they touched her as well. Her face, even in these images, is unmistakable: the long neck, the finely arched brows, the full lips. She was depicted smiting Egypt's enemies in some reliefs, a role traditionally reserved for kings. She may have been co-ruler, or perhaps even pharaoh herself after Akhenaten's death, under the name Neferneferut. But as much as history records her presence, it also records her absence. For after a certain point, the name of Nefertiti seems to vanish. The trail of her disappears into silence, and all that remains is the speculation of centuries. The bust itself, what we now call the Nefertiti bust, was created not as a public monument, not as something to be displayed in a temple, but as a model. It was found in the workshop of a sculptor, a man named Thutmose. His studio lay in the ruins of Amarna, where archaeologists working in the early 20th century uncovered it, remarkably preserved. It was 1912 when German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt came upon it. He brushed the dust away and revealed a face that seemed untouched by time. The painted limestone captured delicate skin tones, the outline of the brows, the hint of a smile on the lips. On her head sat the tall, flat-topped blue crown, edged in gold. Borchardt, upon seeing it, wrote simply, "Description is useless, you have to see it." Even then, it had already become one of the most recognizable works of ancient art. The bust is not whole, one eye socket is empty, the inlay never completed. Traces of pigment suggest that the skin was once more vivid, the lips a deeper red, the crown a brighter blue. But what remains is enough to make us feel that we are standing face to face with the queen herself, her gaze calm, aloof, eternal. What is it about this face that captivates us so? Perhaps it is the illusion of perfection, the balance between realism and idealism. It is not entirely lifelike, her skin is unwrinkled, her features symmetrical, yet it is not entirely divine either. There is humanity in the lines of the mouth, in the tilt of the head, in the directness of her stare. It is as if she looks at us across 3 millennia, aware of what she was, aware of what we would feel, and yet, behind the beauty lies mystery. Who commissioned this bust? Was it ever meant to leave Thutmose's studio? Why was it left unfinished? And perhaps most tantalizing of all, what truly became of Nefertiti herself? Theories abound. Some scholars argue she fell from power, cast aside by Akhenaten when her influence waned. Others believe she may have died suddenly, perhaps during a plague that swept through Amarna. Still others suggest she assumed the role of pharaoh herself, ruling as a female king under another name, bridging the gap between Akhenaten and the boy king who followed, Tutankhamun. There are even whispers that her mummy may still lie hidden somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, misidentified or still undiscovered, waiting for the day when her story can be told not in fragments but in fullness. Until then, the bust remains her voice. It is her most enduring presence, the one thing that cannot be erased. And so the Nefertiti bust, displayed today in Berlin's Neues Museum, gazes out in silence. Millions have stood before it, drawn into the same spell that Borchardt felt more than a century ago. Some argue it should return to Egypt, to be reunited with the land from which it came. Others say it has become a universal icon, belonging now to all of humanity. But wherever it rests, it carries with it the weight of timelessness. The queen who may have ruled, the woman who may have vanished, the face that survived. The Nefertiti bust is not just an artifact. It is a question without an answer, a presence without a voice, a beauty without a story that we can fully know. And perhaps that is why it endures, because in the stillness of her gaze, in the calm of her features, we sense something more than history. We sense the eternal mystery of what it means to be remembered, and what it means to be lost. The desert winds still move across Amarna, the ruins of Akhenaten still crumble beneath the sky. The sun still rises as it once did, Aten's light stretching over the Nile, over the stones, over the hidden tombs, over the past that refuses to fully reveal itself. And somewhere, in a museum far from Egypt, Nefertiti still looks out, waiting. The Vinča tablets. A handful of small clay tablets, marked with lines and symbols, hold a silence older than history itself. The story of the Vinča tablets begins quietly, as so many archaeological tales do, in the soil of the Balkans. Serbia, nestled in southeastern Europe, has long been a crossroads of cultures, a land where rivers converge, plains stretch wide, and mountains keep their watch. Beneath its earth lie layers of time, millennia stacked like pages in a forgotten book, and among those layers, something unexpected was found. Small fragments of fired clay, no larger than the palm of a hand, etched with markings that seem to whisper in a language we cannot quite understand. These tablets, discovered near the village of Vinča, are among the most enigmatic relics of prehistoric Europe. To hold one would be to cradle in your hand a mystery stretching back over 7,000 years, to a time long before cuneiform pressed its wedges into Mesopotamian clay, before Egyptian hieroglyphs adorned the walls of temples, before even the earliest alphabets scratched their letters into stone. The Vinča symbols are older, stranger, and entirely apart from what most of us have been taught about the first written signs. Imagine for a moment the world in which these tablets were created. The Vinča culture flourished in the Neolithic period, around 5500 to 4500 BCE. Villages of timber and clay houses dotted the fertile lands along the Danube, where families grew crops of wheat and barley, raised animals, and crafted tools of polished stone. Life moved in rhythm with the seasons, in cycles of sowing and harvest, of birth and death. And yet, within this seemingly simple world, people created objects that hint at thought, at communication, at symbolism far beyond the needs of daily life. The Vinča people made figurines, human forms with exaggerated eyes, long necks, and stylized bodies. They crafted pottery, decorated with spirals, cross-hatched patterns, and flowing lines. And most puzzling of all, they inscribed tablets and figurines with strange marks. These were not pictures of people or animals, not scenes of hunting or farming. They were abstract, deliberate signs, crosses, chevrons, loops, lines arranged in patterns, some repeating, others unique. When archaeologists first uncovered these tablets in the early 20th century, they could hardly believe what they were seeing. Could these tiny objects represent writing? If so, they would push back the invention of written communication thousands of years earlier than Mesopotamia or Egypt, rewriting everything we thought we knew about human history. Yet the evidence is tantalizing and frustrating in equal measure. The markings are too few to constitute a full language, with only several dozen unique symbols, preserved on a handful of tablets and objects. Scholars cannot be certain whether they represent words, concepts, or something else entirely. Some argue they were merely decorative, a form of sacred symbolism without phonetic value. Others suggest they were a proto-writing system, a step between abstract marks and true language. Still others believe they may have recorded rituals, transactions, or prayers, their meanings now lost in the dust of millennia. Picture one of these tablets, held in the hand of its maker. Perhaps it was a priestess, seated in a quiet corner of a clay-walled house, pressing a pointed tool into the soft surface of a small tablet. Around her, the sounds of daily life drift in. Children playing outside, goats bleating, the soft crackle of firewood. She carves lines and symbols with slow deliberation, each mark chosen, repeated, refined. When finished, she sets it aside to harden in the heat of the hearth, or perhaps in the sun. The tablet is small, portable, a secret message carried through time. But to whom was it addressed? To her neighbors? To the spirits of ancestors? To gods whose names we will never know? The silence of the tablets leaves us guessing. The Vinča culture itself was remarkable in other ways. Their villages were among the largest in Neolithic Europe, some housing thousands of people, an extraordinary concentration for that time. Archaeologists have uncovered entire settlements laid out with rows of houses, storage pits, and communal spaces. The Vinča people practiced advanced crafts, producing copper ornaments, long before metallurgy was widespread elsewhere. They cultivated fields, kept livestock, and traded with distant lands, weaving themselves into the growing web of human society. And yet, it is these small tablets, humble in size but immense in implication, that capture our imagination. Some are no larger than a matchbox, their surfaces crowded with incised symbols. Others are slightly larger, bearing only a few carefully drawn signs. Each one is like a doorway into a vanished world of thought, where ideas pressed into clay might have meant something vital. Consider how revolutionary the act of recording meaning must have been. For countless generations, humans relied on memory, on oral tradition, on stories passed from one voice to another. To mark a surface with a symbol was to take thought out of the body, to make it external, durable, lasting beyond the moment. Writing, or proto-writing, was a step toward immortality of knowledge. It allowed ideas to travel farther than breath, to outlast the speaker. If the Vinča symbols were indeed an early form of writing, then they represent humanity's first attempt to fix thought into matter. To imagine this possibility is to stand at the threshold of history itself. The tablets themselves are few, but the symbols appear on other objects as well. Figurines, pottery shards, tools. This repetition suggests that they were not random doodles, but part of a shared system. Archaeologists have catalogued more than 100 distinct Vinča signs, many of them recurring across sites spread hundreds of kilometers apart. The consistency hints at a cultural language of symbols, understood across communities. Some of the signs are simple, a vertical line, a cross, a chevron. Others are more complex, a ladder-like design, a shape resembling a fish, a loop crossed with a bar. Certain signs appear together in sequences, suggesting a syntax or order, though without translation we cannot know their meaning. Scholars debate whether these were counting marks, records of trade, ritual notations, or something entirely symbolic, akin to a sacred script. The mystery deepens when we consider that these symbols predate the Mesopotamian cuneiform by nearly 2,000 years. If they were truly writing, why did this system not develop into a full script used widely across Europe? Why did it seem to vanish, leaving only scattered echoes in later cultures? Perhaps the Vinča script was too localized, too tied to ritual rather than practical use. Perhaps it was abandoned when new waves of people entered the region, bringing different traditions. Or perhaps it was never meant to be writing in the way we understand it, never a tool for keeping accounts, but rather a key to the sacred, a language of the unseen. To walk through a Vinča site today is to feel the weight of that lost world. Excavated houses reveal traces of hearths, storage jars, grinding stones. Among the ordinary debris of life, broken pottery, animal bones, tools, appear these extraordinary inscribed pieces. They sit like whispers among shouts, small but resonant. Visitors to museums in Belgrade or elsewhere may find themselves pausing, gazing through glass at a clay shard with marks scratched into it 7,000 years ago, trying to imagine the hand that made them. The Vinča tablets also raise questions about the nature of writing itself. What do we call writing? Must it represent spoken language directly, with sounds and grammar, or can it be symbolic, representing concepts, rituals, or ideas? The line between writing and symbol is blurred, especially at the dawn of human expression. By one definition, the Vinča signs may not be writing at all, but by another, they might be the very first spark of it. In this way, the tablets act like a mirror, reflecting not only the past but our own desire to categorize, to know, to impose meaning. They remind us that history is not a fixed story, but a shifting landscape of interpretation. Each generation of scholars reads the signs differently, bringing new theories, new comparisons, new doubts. Over the decades, some have linked the Vinča symbols to later scripts, from the linear A of Minoan Crete to the runes of Northern Europe. Others argue for independent invention, a flowering of symbolic thought that began and ended with the Vinča people. Still others see the tablets as ritual items, used in ceremonies, their markings less about communication and more about connection with the divine. What is certain is that these tablets are unique, standing alone in their time. Few other Neolithic cultures produced anything quite like them. Their existence challenges the tidy narrative of writing's origins, suggesting that the impulse to inscribe meaning may have arisen not once but many times, in many places, as humans sought to leave their mark upon the world. Consider the intimacy of these objects. Unlike monumental inscriptions carved on temple walls or grand stelae proclaiming kings, the Vinča tablets are small, personal, almost secret. They could be held in a pocket, hidden in a hand, tucked into a pouch. Perhaps they were talismans, each sign carrying protective or spiritual power. Perhaps they were teaching tools, used to instruct novices in ritual or tradition. Or perhaps they were simply the beginnings of something grander, the first steps of a written language that never had time to flourish. As we contemplate them, we are invited into a quiet meditation on human expression. What drives a person to make a mark, to carve a line that endures beyond the moment? At the heart of it lies a desire to be remembered, to fix something fleeting into permanence. The Vinča tablets are traces of thought preserved in clay, thoughts we can see but not hear. They are a puzzle with missing pieces, an unfinished sentence stretching across 7 millennia, and so they remain, enigmatic, silent, powerful. A handful of small objects excavated from the earth of Serbia, carrying with them questions too large for easy answers. Were they writing, the first in Europe, perhaps the first in the world? Or were they something else entirely, a symbolic system whose meaning died with its makers? The truth may never be known, yet in the mystery itself lies their beauty. For in gazing at these tablets, we are reminded that the human story is deeper, more complex, and more wondrous than we often imagine. History is not a straight line, but a tapestry of attempts, experiments, sparks of brilliance that sometimes fade, sometimes ignite, and always leave traces for us to find. The Vinča tablets, fragile and ancient, invite us to lean closer, to listen for the echo of a voice we cannot quite hear. They remind us that the urge to speak across time is not new, but as old as humanity itself. And though their message is silent, their presence speaks volumes, a whisper from the dawn of writing, still waiting, still patient, still mysterious. The Despilio tablet. It is late evening, and the waters of Lake Orestiada move gently against the reeds. The surface glimmers with a soft silver sheen, stirred now and again by the quiet touch of wind. Imagine yourself standing on the shoreline, gazing across the ripples, the hills of northern Greece, rising like a protective embrace around the valley. You are in a place where time folds in on itself, where echoes of a forgotten world still whisper beneath the soil and the water. Somewhere, hidden in the marshy ground not far from this tranquil lake, a message lay buried for thousands of years, waiting to be seen again. A message pressed into wood, older than parchment, older than papyrus, perhaps older even than writing itself. This is the story of the Despilio tablet. Let us move slowly into it. Take your time as you listen. Imagine the scene. Allow your mind to walk gently across landscapes long vanished, and feel yourself drifting into a softer rhythm, as if your heartbeat begins to match the pace of water lapping at a wooden dock. For this story is not hurried. It is as patient as the tablet itself, which waited nearly 7,000 years before being noticed again. The tablet was discovered in 1993, during excavations at a lakeside settlement near the modern Greek town of Kastoria. Archaeologists had known for some time that this area contained a Neolithic village, a place of wooden houses built upon stilts that jutted into the shallow water. But what they did not expect was to uncover a wooden plank, preserved by the lake's mud, inscribed with markings that no one could read. It was carbon dated to around 5200 BCE, making it older than Sumerian cuneiform, older than Egyptian hieroglyphs, older than most known writing systems. Picture that moment, a dig team working patiently in the wet ground, brushing away layers of soil, and suddenly the soft grain of wood appears. Wood almost never survives so long. Yet here it was, darkened by age and water, yet still intact. And then, upon its surface, lines, symbols, notched carvings. They looked intentional, deliberate, made by human hands, a message across time. No one knows exactly what the carvings meant. Some believe they were a form of proto-writing, symbols not yet representing full language, but more than mere decoration. Others suggest they may have been tally marks, or ritual notations, or a kind of mnemonic aid, helping people remember oral traditions. Whatever they were, they stand as one of the oldest glimpses we have into the human urge to mark meaning, to preserve thought beyond the mind. Let us step back into the world in which this tablet was made. Imagine yourself in the Neolithic, in a lakeside settlement almost 7,000 years ago. Wooden walkways extend over the shallows, linking clusters of small huts. Smoke drifts from hearths, carrying the smell of cooking grain and fish. Children run barefoot across the planks, their laughter mingling with the sounds of ducks and herons lifting from the reeds. The air is rich with life, but also with silence, the kind of silence broken only by the slow rhythm of daily survival. The people here were farmers and fishers. They grew barley and wheat, gathered fruits and nuts, hunted deer in the surrounding forests. But they were also thinkers, symbol makers, people who sought to leave behind something lasting. Perhaps one of them, an elder, a craftsman, a ritual leader, took a piece of wood and carved symbols into it. Did they imagine it would last for millennia? Surely not. Perhaps it was a temporary note, meant only to help remember a transaction or an offering. Perhaps it was sacred, intended for the eyes of the gods alone. And yet through chance, through mud and water and time, it endured until we discovered it. Think of how fragile wood is, how quickly it decays, and then think of this plank, lying quietly beneath the ground, protected by the wet clay that sealed it from air. The world changed above it, civilizations rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed, languages were born and forgotten, yet the tablet remained, waiting for a hand to lift it again. When the tablet was shown to the world, it caused excitement, but also caution. Some scholars were eager to call it writing, to place it among the earliest scripts. Others hesitated, warning that the markings might be random, or simply ornamental. But when you look at it, as photographs now allow us to, the symbols carry intention. There are repeated shapes, groupings that suggest pattern, order and meaning, a straight line, a crosshatch, a circle, a curve. The human mind reaches for sense, tries to decode, but for now the code resists, and so the Dispilio tablet sits in mystery. We cannot read it, and perhaps we never will, but in its silence it speaks of something even greater, the human desire to record. Before alphabets, before books, before even cities, there was already the wish to mark thought into matter, to extend memory beyond the moment. Let your imagination drift further into that lakeside world. Night has fallen, torches flicker, casting warm light upon the dark water. The stars above are far brighter than we ever see them now, an ocean of light stretching across the heavens. The villagers gather around fires, sharing food and stories. Perhaps the tablet was there, held in someone's hands, its markings read aloud, or explained in gestures, its meaning known to them but lost to us. Maybe it was a tool for teaching children about the cycles of the seasons, or for remembering which offerings to make at certain times of year. Maybe it held the beginnings of myth, a record of ancestors, a map of memory, and what of the person who carved it? Picture them sitting quietly, knife in hand, carefully pressing marks into the wood, each cut deliberate, each line chosen. Did they work slowly, repeating symbols already known, or were they inventing, experimenting, trying to make sense of new ideas? The air would have been still, broken only by the sound of the knife on wood, the distant call of night birds, the soft lapping of the lake. A timeless scene, preserved not in sight, but in this surviving artifact. Archaeologists uncovered not only the tablet, but also the remains of the settlement, tools, pottery, figurines, bones of animals. Each tells a story of life at the edge of water, of people balancing earth and lake. But the tablet stands apart. It is not simply utilitarian. It is expressive. It hints at a mental world, a cognitive leap, a step toward abstract recording. Close your eyes now and imagine walking through that Neolithic village. The wooden planks creak beneath your feet. A dog trots past, glancing up at you with curious eyes. Somewhere, a pot boils, sending steam into the air. You hear voices, a song, perhaps, or a chant. You pass a hut where someone sits carving symbols into wood, their face calm, intent. You cannot understand what they are writing, but you can feel the weight of its meaning. You are witnessing the dawn of expression beyond speech. Thousands of years later, when the tablet was lifted from the mud, it had no voice to explain itself. It lay in the hands of modern people, silent but heavy with mystery, and even now, when you think of it, you feel a hush, as if the tablet wants to be contemplated, not solved. Perhaps its greatest gift is not its message, but its reminder that humans, from the very beginning, have sought to leave behind signs of thought, even when words themselves were still unborn. The Despilio tablet remains unique. Few other wooden inscriptions survive from such an early time. Most materials of prehistory, wood, cloth, leather, have been lost. Only stone and clay endure. But here, through the preserving power of waterlogged soil, we have wood, carved by hands long vanished. It is like hearing a whisper from 7 millennia away, faint but distinct. And so, as you let yourself drift further into rest, think of that lakeside village, its calm waters, its flickering fires. Think of the hand that carved symbols into a plank of wood, not knowing that thousands of years later, someone would hold it up in wonder. Think of the silence of the tablet, and how in that silence, there is a kind of peace. Because perhaps in the end, the meaning of the Despilio tablet is not meant to be solved. Perhaps its meaning is exactly this, that humans have always reached for permanence, always tried to leave marks that outlast themselves. And in that reaching, there is beauty. So let the story carry you like the waters of the lake, steady and gentle. Imagine the reeds swaying in the night breeze, the stars reflecting upon the surface, the quiet hum of insects, and the distant splash of fish. Somewhere in that stillness, a wooden tablet rests, carrying its secret through time. And you too can rest, carried by the same quietness, untroubled, timeless, at peace. The Glosal tablets. Have you ever wondered what secrets the earth still holds, waiting quietly in the soil, waiting to be touched by accident and revealed in silence? The story I am about to share with you is one of those quiet unearthings. It begins not in a palace, not in a library, not even in a famous ruin that people traveled far to see. Instead, it begins in a farmer's field in rural France, on a day that was ordinary until the ground itself decided to remember. Close your eyes, if you wish, and imagine the countryside of central France in the early 20th century. The place is quiet, touched by soft hills and scattered trees, with villages that smell of wood smoke and freshly turned earth. Time there runs slowly. Generations till the same fields. Stones in the walls bear the marks of many hands, and the earth, though ancient, seems peaceful. But just below the surface, something extraordinary has been resting. And in 1924, the earth gave it back. A boy named Emile Fradin was plowing with his grandfather when his plow turned over something that didn't belong to the furrows. At first it was only a broken piece of stone, then another, then fragments that didn't look like the usual pebbles or old pottery one sometimes finds. The soil had collapsed slightly as though there was a hollow beneath. And within this hollow, the boy and his grandfather saw what would become one of the most debated finds in all of archaeology. A small chamber filled with objects no one could quite explain. Inside were clay tablets, many with strange markings carved into them. There were bone tools, ceramic vessels, even small figurines, some with elongated faces or bodies that seemed part human, part animal. And among the pieces, dozens of flat tablets inscribed with signs that looked like writing, but not any known writing. These became known as the Glosal tablets, after the village where they were found. And from the moment they were unearthed, they began to whisper confusion into the ears of scholars.
Let us linger here gently with the discovery.
Imagine the child's hands brushing soil away, holding up the clay, wondering why these marks were made, who had pressed them into the surface so long ago. The markings are neat, but unfamiliar. Rows of signs, some shaped like crosses, others like circles, others like lines bent into angles. To an untrained eye, they seem meaningful. To an archaeologist, they would seem even more so. Yet the meaning refuses to yield. As the discovery spread, scholars, journalists, and curious visitors began to arrive in Glosal. The quiet village was suddenly a place of argument and fascination. For some, these tablets were proof that Europe held an ancient independent script, one perhaps older than Mesopotamian cuneiform, older even than Egyptian hieroglyphs. If true, the story of writing itself would have to be rewritten. But for others, the tablets were too strange, too convenient, too unlike what had been seen elsewhere. They smelled of forgery, and so began a debate that has never fully ended. Are the Glosal tablets the relics of a forgotten European script, or are they the clever inventions of a boy and his family, carved into clay to attract attention? The years that followed were filled with disputes, claims and counterclaims. Experts examined the signs, tried to link them to known alphabets or prehistoric symbols. Some declared them genuine, pointing to the wear on the tablets, the context of the discovery, and the consistency of the markings. Others dismissed them, insisting that the signs were a jumble, not a real script, and that the whole find was contaminated by modern interference. Yet, despite the noise of scholarly quarrels, the tablets themselves remained as quiet as when they were first buried. They do not answer, they only rest, their marks as mysterious as ever, their silence as deep. Now, if you allow yourself to drift into the calm of this mystery, imagine holding one of these tablets in your hand. It is small, fitting easily in the palm, its surface rough but cool. The clay is baked, hardened by time. Across its face are lines and signs pressed by fingers or tools long ago. You trace them with your fingertip, straight lines, small circles, intersecting shapes. They seem deliberate, yet you cannot read them. You can only feel the weight of meaning, hovering just out of reach, like a language you once knew in a dream, but have since forgotten. What might the symbols say, if they say anything at all? Were they records of trade, the first accounts of exchanges of grain or animals between early farmers? Were they prayers, asking unseen powers for rain, or protection, or safe passage? Were they stories, myths pressed into clay to preserve memory? Or were they simply exercises in marking, early experiments with symbols before writing was truly born? These questions hang like soft lanterns in the air, glowing faintly, never dimming, never answered. The village of Glazal became a quiet battlefield for ideas. Some researchers believed the artifacts belonged to the Neolithic, more than 5,000 years ago. Others placed them in the Iron Age. Still others insisted they were no older than medieval times. And of course, the harshest critics said they were modern fakes altogether. Radiocarbon dating, applied later in the 20th century, gave results that were inconsistent. Some tablets seemed ancient, others surprisingly recent, and so the debate only deepened. What never changed, though, was the fascination. People are drawn to puzzles that will not resolve. The Glazal tablets remain like an unopened letter from the past, addressed to us, yet written in a language we cannot decipher, and so we are left to imagine. Perhaps they belong to a small, unknown community in the heart of France, people who scratched their thoughts into clay, who built rituals and kept stories that have otherwise vanished. Perhaps they were guardians of a tradition that was never shared widely, a script that flickered like a candle flame and then went out, leaving behind only these fragile tablets as proof that it once burned. Or perhaps the tablets tell us not of ancient people, but of ourselves. The way we long for stories, the way we yearn to see connections, to believe that even in quiet valleys, the roots of history run deeper than anyone expected. The debate may never end. The tablets will always be contested, their authenticity questioned, their meaning withheld. Yet in their very uncertainty lies their beauty, because uncertainty invites imagination, and imagination, in turn, lets us wander through possibilities, gently, without conclusion, like a dream that stretches onward. And so, as we close our eyes on the quiet hills of Glazal, the tablets rest where they were found. Whether ancient or modern, genuine or forged, they remain mysterious companions to our sleep, whispering that the earth still holds secrets, and that sometimes, even when the ground gives them back, they are meant to stay unexplained. The Grejnica tablets. In the quiet fields of northwestern Bulgaria, near a small village called Grejnica, the earth once kept a secret that had been buried for thousands of years. At first glance, the land here seems unremarkable, with rolling plains, patches of farmland, and low hills softened by time. Yet beneath this soil, beneath the plow lines and the roots, something extraordinary was waiting. It was not gold, nor weapons, nor the ruins of a forgotten palace, but something even more elusive. Fragments of clay, shaped by human hands long ago, marked with symbols whose meanings remain hidden. These are known today as the Grejnica tablets, and they belong to that mysterious category of artifacts that stir questions about the origins of writing itself. The story begins in 1969, when archaeologists exploring the region uncovered a Neolithic settlement site near the village. As they dug through the layers of soil, their tools revealed shards of pottery, traces of hearths, and the remains of ancient dwellings. And then, among the fragments, they came across several small clay tablets. They were unlike the decorated pottery that usually emerged from digs of this age. These tablets carried deliberate markings, etched or pressed into their surfaces with care. Some marks were straight, some curved, some arranged into grids or crosses. Their patterns did not appear random. They suggested intention, design, and possibly communication. Scholars quickly realized that the Grejnica tablets belonged to a broader phenomenon in southeastern Europe, enigmatic inscribed objects, dating from the 5th millennium BCE, connected with what archaeologists call the Vinča culture and its neighboring communities. These cultures left behind not only settlements and tools, but also an astonishing number of small clay artifacts, bearing incised symbols. Together, they hint at a system of signs that may represent the earliest experiments with writing, thousands of years before the cuneiform of Mesopotamia or the hieroglyphs of Egypt. But the Grejnica tablets are different from ordinary pottery decorations. Their surfaces carry repeated motifs, a ladder-like form, crosses within circles, zigzags, hatchings, and geometric combinations. Some symbols recur across multiple tablets, as if part of a shared vocabulary. Others appear only once, resisting easy interpretation. Were they marks of ownership, records of goods, religious symbols, or were they the beginnings of a written language, now long lost? When you imagine these tablets, picture clay still damp from shaping, pressed gently with a stick or a fingernail, then hardened by fire or sun. The hands that made them belonged to people who lived over 7,000 years ago. They dwelled in houses of wood and clay, tended flocks and fields, and built communities along the fertile Danube basin. Their world was both simple and complex, simple in its tools and daily routines, yet complex in its beliefs, rituals, and connections across distant lands. And within this world they felt the urge to mark symbols, to leave traces of thought on clay. The Grečnica discovery has since been compared to other Neolithic sign systems in Europe, such as those of Tartaria in Romania, Vinča in Serbia, and Dispilio in Greece. Together, these artifacts create a constellation of mysteries scattered across the Balkans. They seem to whisper of a symbolic system that spanned wide regions, yet left no clear descendant. Unlike cuneiform, which developed into recognizable writing systems, these signs appear as a fragment of an unfinished story, a glimpse of an experiment that never fully survived. When archaeologists studied the Grečnica tablets, they cataloged the symbols carefully, drawing comparisons with others across the region. They found patterns that hinted at consistency, but the sample was too small to establish grammar or vocabulary. Some researchers suggested that the tablets might have been used in rituals, functioning as tokens or charms rather than records of language. Others argued that they were early attempts to capture information, a kind of proto-writing that encoded concepts but not full speech. The debate continues to this day, with no consensus in sight. To sit with the Grečnica tablets in your mind is to enter a space of uncertainty. Imagine holding one in your hand, a small clay object, no larger than the palm, its surface lined with mysterious marks. You run your fingers over the grooves, wondering what they once meant. Did they represent numbers, seasons, offerings to deities? Perhaps they recorded agreements between people, or marked the passage of time. Or perhaps they held meanings so symbolic and spiritual that they cannot be translated into modern categories. What makes them especially intriguing is the possibility that they reflect a cultural memory shared across the ancient Balkans. The Vinča culture and its neighbors flourished between 5500 and 4500 BCE, creating some of the earliest large village settlements in Europe. These people produced fine pottery, figurines, tools, and ornaments. They engaged in long-distance trade, exchanging obsidian, copper, and shells. And in this vibrant context, they also produced symbols. To mark clay with lines and patterns was to participate in a tradition that reached across hundreds of miles and centuries. The Grečnica tablets are not elaborate artworks. They are modest in scale, simple in execution. Yet their simplicity hides their depth. A cross within a circle, for instance, may seem basic, but across cultures such symbols have carried immense meaning. The union of directions, the sun, the cycle of life. A ladder-like motif might signify movement, ascent, or measurement. Zigzags may evoke water, serpents, or boundaries. Each mark is both ordinary and extraordinary, capable of opening many interpretations. Some scholars have gone so far as to claim that the Grečnica tablets and their relatives represent the first true writing in the world. This view is controversial because most experts still credit Mesopotamia with that distinction. But the Balkan artifacts force us to reconsider. If writing is defined as a system of signs used consistently to represent information, then perhaps these tablets deserve recognition. If writing is defined more strictly as a way to record spoken language, then perhaps they fall short. Either way, they reveal that the human impulse to create signs, to fix thought into matter, arose independently in many places. There is a certain beauty in the ambiguity. Unlike Mesopotamian cuneiform, whose translations can reveal contracts, myths, and laws, the Grečnica symbols resist decoding. They remain silent, speaking only in possibilities. In that silence, they stir the imagination. One can envision scenes of Neolithic villagers gathered around a fire, using tablets to recount stories, teach children, or conduct rituals. Or perhaps they were tokens kept by individuals, reminders of identity or belief. The truth may be lost, but the questions endure. Archaeology often works like this. Fragments emerge from the soil, half legible, half hidden. Scholars debate, compare, hypothesize. And in the gaps between evidence and certainty, imagination blooms. The Grečnica tablets are perfect examples of this process. They show us that even the humblest artifacts can carry immense weight, not because of what we know, but because of what we do not. Consider the landscape of Grečnica itself. The village lies near fertile plains, with rivers winding through and mountains not far away. In ancient times, these resources would have sustained communities, providing food, water, and trade routes. The people here were not isolated. They were part of a web of cultures that stretched across southeastern Europe. The tablets, therefore, are not isolated curiosities. They belong to a larger cultural conversation, one in which symbols and meanings were exchanged and adapted. When the tablets were first displayed in museums, they caught the attention of scholars and the public alike. Visitors marveled at their age, their enigmatic marks, their aura of mystery. Some felt that they challenged the entire chronology of human communication. Others saw them as beautiful puzzles, objects to admire rather than decode. In either case, they drew people into a deeper reflection. How did humanity begin to write? This question carries weight, because writing is often seen as the boundary between prehistory and history. When people began to write, they began to leave records that survive beyond memory. Writing allows voices to cross centuries. Without it, we rely on artifacts, tools, and ruins to tell stories. The Gradesnica tablets sit precisely at this threshold. They are not quite writing, perhaps, but more than decoration. They exist in the liminal space where thought first sought permanence. Imagine again the hand that carved the marks. The tool presses into soft clay, leaving a line, then another. The maker pauses, considers, adds a cross or a curve. Did they know that this small act would carry weight 7,000 years later? Probably not. They were likely fulfilling a ritual, a task, a habit of their culture, yet unknowingly they were also contributing to the long human journey toward recording thought. Some modern scholars compare the Gradesnica symbols to the cave paintings of earlier times. Both are expressions of symbolic thinking, attempts to represent reality or belief outside the mind. But while cave paintings are images, these tablets rely on abstract signs. That abstraction may be the crucial step that leads toward writing. It is one thing to draw an animal, it is another to mark a symbol that stands for an idea. The Gradesnica tablets, then, represent not just art, but abstraction. The tablets themselves are few in number, fragile and carefully preserved. They have survived only because they were baked, intentionally or by accident, protecting them from decay. Countless other such objects may have crumbled away over millennia, leaving only this rare glimpse. What survives is always a fragment of what once was. That scarcity adds to their value, reminding us how easily human expression can be lost. Over the years, researchers have attempted various methods to analyze the symbols: statistical comparisons, computer modeling, cross-cultural parallels. Some find correlations with later scripts, such as Linear A from Crete or the Cypriot syllabary. Others see no connection, regarding the tablets as isolated experiments. The lack of consensus is telling. These objects resist being pinned down, defying definitive classification. They remain in the category of enigma, alongside the Phaistos disc and the Indus Valley seals, and perhaps that is where they belong. For there is something profoundly human about mysteries that endure. They remind us that history is not a straight line, but a patchwork of beginnings and endings, attempts and failures, remembered and forgotten paths. The Gradesnica tablets may not have led to a lasting script, but they still testify to the creativity of their makers. They show that the desire to record, to symbolize, to give shape to thought, is as old as civilization itself. Today, if you visit Bulgaria, you might find reproductions of these tablets in museums, their marks displayed under glass. Tourists glance, scholars linger, children peer curiously. Few can resist the urge to wonder, and in that wondering, the tablets fulfill their purpose, not to tell us exactly what they meant, but to draw us into reflection. They connect us with people who lived 7,000 years ago, not through language, but through mystery. As you reflect on them, let your thoughts wander further. Imagine the settlement where they were made, houses clustered together, smoke rising from fires, dogs barking, fields stretching outward. The air carries the scent of grain, the sound of tools striking stone. In one corner, someone sits with a lump of clay, shaping it into a tablet. They mark lines carefully, each stroke deliberate. Around them, life goes on. Children playing, animals grazing, elders telling stories. The tablet dries in the sun, later to be buried, later still to be found. The Gradesnica tablets remind us that communication is not always about clarity. Sometimes it is about the gesture itself, the reaching out, the attempt to fix meaning. Even if we cannot read them, we can sense the humanity behind them. They are bridges across time, imperfect but enduring, and so they remain. Fragments of clay, fragments of thought, fragments of a story that will never be fully told. They resist final answers, inviting us instead into a space of quiet curiosity. In their silence, they remind us that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be held, contemplated, and cherished, like the tablets themselves, signs that spoke before words. The Makapansgat pebble. It is a small stone, carried across time, across hands, across lives unseen, and yet it still holds a face. The Makapansgat pebble is unlike any other. Found not far from what is now known as Makapansgat in South Africa, it is a simple piece of jasperite. Yet when one looks upon it, an unmistakable image seems to appear. The impression of two eyes and a mouth, the faint suggestion of a human face. And this small, curious object, resting in the red soil for millions of years, has become one of the most whispered about finds in all of archaeology. For it suggests not a tool, not a weapon, not a functional artifact, but something else, a symbol, a choice. The story of this pebble begins not with the stone itself, but with the world it belonged to, South Africa, around 3 million years ago. A place of shifting savannas, scattered trees, rocky shelters, and winding rivers. A world alive with creatures we would recognize and others we would not. Antelopes bounded across the plains, lions prowled silently in the tall grasses, and giant long-extinct relatives of elephants shook the earth as they passed. But among them, small groups of hominins moved carefully, alert to every sound, every shadow. These were not yet modern humans, not yet even the direct ancestors of modern humans, but beings earlier still. Australopithecus, Africanus. Australopithecus was not a toolmaker in the way later hominins would be. They did not carve hand axes of stone or fashion blades from flint. Their world was simpler, their survival balanced on keen senses, quick feet, and cooperative movement. And yet, somewhere in that ancient landscape, one of them noticed something unusual. A small stone among many, washed and worn by water, shaped by chance and the slow passing of time. It bore markings that looked like something familiar, a face. Imagine the moment. A forager bends to gather edible roots near a stream, the soil dark and damp from recent rains. Their hands brush against pebbles and grit, and then pause on one that feels different. They turn it in the light. Its reddish surface catches the sun. Two dark indentations stare back, and beneath them, a line runs across, curved like a mouth. It is not exact, not intentional, not carved, but it is enough. Something stirs in recognition. This small piece of jasperite seems alive with meaning. What did they think? Perhaps they laughed, in the way that recognition surprises us. Perhaps they tilted it back and forth, showing it to another. Perhaps they tucked it away, not because it could cut or dig or kill, but because it mattered. And so the pebble was carried, across a distance of kilometers from the bed of a stream where jasperite could be found, to a cave where none should have been. That journey tells us more than words could. It was not dropped there by accident. It was taken, held, brought home. This simple act transforms the Makapansgat pebble from an ordinary stone into something extraordinary. It becomes not just a fossil of geology, but a fossil of thought. For the pebble speaks of recognition, of symbolism, perhaps even of the earliest stirrings of imagination. Long before writing, long before art painted onto cave walls, long before statues carved in ivory or bone, there was this, an object valued not for function, but for meaning. And it is meaning that gives the pebble its strange power, even today. When archaeologists uncovered it in 1925, its presence seemed almost accidental at first, a curious piece of red jasperite among bones and soil in the Makapansgat cave. But soon it became clear. The cave itself contained no such stone. It could only have been carried there. It was not the geology of the place. The conclusion was inescapable. Someone had brought it. Not by chance, but by choice. Think of that choice. In a world where survival meant endless movement, scanning for danger, seeking water and food, this moment of stopping to notice a face in stone is remarkable. It suggests curiosity, perhaps even wonder. Did Australopithecus see themselves in it? Did they sense another being, a spirit, a presence? Was it a charm, a token, a piece of luck, or simply an object too strange to discard? We cannot know, but we can imagine. And in that imagining we find ourselves sitting beside them, in the mouth of a cave, as firelight flickers against stone, the pebble resting in a small rough hand. The Makapansgat pebble is often called the first example of symbolic thinking. Not art in the strictest sense, for no human hand carved it. Nature did the shaping, but meaning was placed upon it. That is the threshold, the difference between ignoring and recognizing, between passing by and stopping to keep. If true, then this little stone marks one of the earliest steps toward culture, toward imagination, toward humanity as we understand it. Now, let us linger in that cave, more than 3 million years ago. The night is alive with distant calls, hyenas laughing in the distance, owls hunting in the dark. The group gathers close together, their bodies warming one another, their ears sharp to the sounds outside. In the center, small flames crackle, shadows leap and twist along the walls, and somewhere, among scattered bones and rough stones, lies the pebble. No one alive then could have guessed that millions of years later, it would be uncovered, studied, and held in the hands of modern humans. Yet the pebble carries with it that moment of choice, preserved like a whisper across time. When we look at it today, we do the same thing as they once did. We see a face, we recognize, and recognition binds us across the chasm of years. Archaeologists debate its significance still. Some argue that it cannot prove symbolic thought. Perhaps it was simply picked up by chance. Perhaps it meant nothing. And yet, when we hold it in our minds, the weight of possibility is heavy. Why carry it so far if it meant nothing? Why keep it at all? If function was survival, then this was something else entirely. Something deeper. In many ways, the pebble is less about itself than about us, about the need to find meaning, to see faces in clouds, to see patterns in stars, to shape stories around objects. The Makapansgat pebble invites us into the earliest stirrings of that instinct. It is a mirror, not only of a face, but of thought itself, and so the pebble rests now, not in the cave, but in the hands of researchers and in the glass of museums. It is small enough to slip into a pocket, light enough to forget, ordinary enough that without its markings it would mean nothing, but with them, it carries a weight greater than stone. It carries the possibility of the first symbol. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it again, the pebble lying in a hand roughened by survival, its smooth surface cool against the skin. A finger traces the indentations, the simple grooves that suggest eyes and a mouth. A pause, a recognition, perhaps a smile, and then the pebble is kept. That moment, fragile and small, has carried itself forward through deep time to us, still alive with meaning. The Makapansgat pebble may be no more than chance, but it may also be the first glimpse of imagination awakening in the minds of our distant ancestors, and in that thought lies something quiet, something humbling, something that makes us feel the long, unbroken thread that ties us to the very beginnings of being human. The market gate of Miletus. It begins softly, with the thought of walking into a city that no longer exists as it once did. A place where the stone skeleton of a marketplace gate still holds echoes of voices, footsteps, and the breath of centuries gone by. Miletus, once a thriving ancient city on the western coast of Anatolia, stood as a place where the sea touched the land, with both promise and peril. It was a city of thinkers, of sailors, of merchants whose words and goods stretched from the Aegean to lands beyond. Among its many marvels, the market gate rose in carved marble, not just a doorway but a declaration of presence, wealth, and permanence. Though time carried it away from its original setting, and centuries turned it into a puzzle of fragments, it survives still, not in its home by the sea, but within the great halls of Berlin's Pergamon Museum. But before it became an artifact displayed far from the dust and air of its birthplace, the market gate of Miletus was alive. An entry, a frame for human life, a border between the hum of commerce and the open streets of a city known for its brilliance. To think of the gate is to think of movement, feet passing beneath, voices rising, deals struck, greetings exchanged, and the rhythm of daily existence drawn together through carved stone. The market gate was more than masonry. It was a statement of ambition, of cultural reach, and of the way Miletus positioned itself within the world. Built in the 2nd century CE, during the height of Roman influence, it stood in a city already ancient by then, a place that had known Greek philosophers, shifting empires, and the endless tide of ships docking at its harbors. One can imagine the stone gleaming when first completed, marble blocks fitted together, Corinthian columns rising with fluted shafts, capitals decorated with curling leaves. Above them, archways crowned the structure, creating both openness and weight. It was not simply practical, it was ceremonial. Even the act of passing beneath it must have carried a sense of stepping into something significant, like walking through a line of history, into the daily heartbeat of the agora, the marketplace where everything and everyone converged. To understand the market gate is to understand Miletus itself. The city had long been a beacon of Greek culture, the birthplace of philosophers such as Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, men who tried to describe the cosmos in rational terms, pulling knowledge out of myth. It was a city of engineers and architects too, a place where Hippodamus pioneered the grid plan for cities, something that would influence urban design for centuries. Yet by the Roman period, Miletus had become layered with cultural imprints, its Greek foundation reshaped by Roman grandeur. The market gate is a symbol of that fusion. The marble, likely quarried not far from the city, was cut and shaped by artisans who understood both Greek proportion and Roman magnificence. Each block, each carved detail was meant to endure, though no one could have foreseen the long journey it would eventually take. Standing before it today, in Berlin, one feels the dislocation. The gate's true home is far away, by the Turkish coast where Miletus lies mostly in ruins, a site of scattered stone and silent amphitheaters. Yet within the museum, reconstructed painstakingly from thousands of fragments, the gate rises again, towering and intact enough to suggest its ancient form. It is both authentic and displaced, a monument not only of antiquity, but of archaeology itself, carrying with it the story of excavation, removal, and reconstruction. The journey of the market gate is as fascinating as its creation. When it was unearthed at the beginning of the 20th century by German archaeologists, it was already in pieces, collapsed by centuries of earthquakes. The effort to transport it was monumental. Massive marble blocks shipped across seas and railways, catalogued and reassembled like a vast stone puzzle. In Berlin, it became part of the Pergamon Museum, itself an embodiment of imperial ambition, the desire to collect and display the world's ancient treasures. Yet in the quiet of night, if you imagine yourself back in Miletus, before the earthquakes, before the crumbling, you might hear the life that once passed beneath the market gate. The clang of metal, the bray of donkeys, the shuffle of sandals across stone pavements, the smell of olives, of spices brought in from far ports, of fresh bread sold from stalls. Citizens would have met there, pausing in the shade of its structure before stepping into the agora. Philosophers might have spoken, traders bargained, children darted about while parents pulled them back. The gate was not a static monument, it was a threshold into life. Its design reveals much about the Roman approach to public architecture. The use of multiple stories, with columns stacked one upon another, gave the impression of height and grandeur. The decoration of capitals, friezes, and niches for statues allowed the structure to speak visually to those who entered. It proclaimed the prosperity of the city, its connection to Rome, and its mastery of both Greek tradition and Roman innovation. And yet, for all its magnificence, the market gate reminds us of the fragility of permanence. Earthquakes shattered it, centuries buried it. Only fragments survived until rediscovery breathed new life into its remains. What we see today is a reconstruction, a careful stitching together of what once was whole. The cracks are visible, the replacements noticeable, but perhaps that too is fitting, for history is rarely seamless. It comes to us broken, requiring imagination and patience to rebuild its shape. Miletus itself is now far quieter than it was when the gate first stood. Once a city of influence, it dwindled as the Meander River silted its harbor, cutting it off from the sea that had been its lifeline. Where ships once docked, farmland now stretches. Where bustling crowds once moved, only scattered visitors walk among ruins. Yet the market gate lives on, both in Berlin's halls and in the imagination of those who try to picture the life that once flowed beneath it. To think of this gate is to reflect on the nature of thresholds. They are points of passage, neither inside nor outside, but between. They frame not only architecture but human experience. Each person who passed beneath the market gate carried with them a moment of transition, stepping into the busy marketplace, or leaving it behind, carrying goods, news, or hopes for the day. The gate witnessed uncountable such passages, each one unrecorded yet folded into its stone memory. And so, when we gaze at the gate today, whether in person or in thought, we stand with those who once passed under it. We see what they saw, touch what they touched. The marble is the same, even if the world around it has changed entirely. The gate is a survivor, a fragment of continuity across the collapse of centuries. In this way, the market gate of Miletus becomes more than an ancient monument. It becomes a meditation on time itself, on the endurance of stone, the fragility of human ambition, and the strange journeys that objects take, sometimes ending up far from where they began. It is a story of a city, of a people, of a moment in architectural brilliance, and of the quiet afterlives that monuments endure. And as you imagine yourself walking slowly beneath it, picture the sunlight of Anatolia spilling across white marble, shadows falling along fluted columns, voices mingling in the open air. Then picture the silence of the museum hall, where the same gate stands enclosed, far from its sea and its city, yet still intact enough to whisper across time. The market gate does not end, it continues as long as people look upon it, wonder at it, and pass by as countless others once did. The Mask of La Roche-Codar. There are some discoveries that feel as though they do not belong to us at all. They sit in museums, locked away, yet they seem to peer out at us, across an abyss of time so vast that we cannot really measure it with words. One such discovery lies not in the shining halls of Rome or the towering pyramids of Egypt, but in a quiet cave along the banks of the Loire River in central France. It is not golden, nor is it monumental. It is a fragment of stone, shaped and pierced in a way that whispers of eyes and a mouth, of a face that stares back. Archaeologists call it the Mask of La Roche-Codar. To those who spend time with it, however, it is far more than a mask. It is a question mark pressed into stone, carved or nudged into existence, some 75,000 years ago by Neanderthal hands. Imagine the scene for a moment. The Loire flows slow and dark, cutting its path through the limestone ridges of the valley. The cave where the mask was found does not announce itself loudly. It crouches low, its opening obscured by brush and stone, as though hiding its secret from the passing millennia. Inside, the air is cool and constant. Even on the hottest summer day, it is damp, filled with the scent of earth and stone. It was in this cave, tucked beneath layers of sediment, that the small object lay undisturbed for tens of thousands of years. When it was finally unearthed in the 20th century, its appearance startled those who saw it. At first glance, it resembles a human face. A flat stone of flint has been pierced through by a small piece of bone, wedged precisely so that the effect is unmistakable. Two hollows for eyes, a suggestion of a nose, and a line that could be seen as a mouth. The stone does not look like a natural accident. It looks like intention, and yet that is where the mystery begins. If it is intentional, if it is truly a mask or an early attempt at symbolic representation, then it upends long-held assumptions about the Neanderthals who roamed Europe in the Paleolithic. For decades, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish, unimaginative, little more than strong-limbed wanderers with no inner life. The Mask of La Roche-Cotard whispers something different. It suggests that even 75 millennia ago, in the shadow of glaciers and in a world far harsher than ours, beings with heavy brows and strong jaws looked at stone not just for its utility, but for its possibility. They could see a face where none existed. They could create. The archaeologist who first uncovered it, François Borde, recognized at once that it was not simply another flake of worked flint. Bordes was no stranger to stone tools. His excavations across France had brought to light countless hand axes, scrapers, and blades. But this object refused categorization. It was not sharpened for cutting, nor was it shaped for piercing. It did not fit the language of function. Instead, it hovered in that ambiguous territory we call art, or perhaps proto-art. To hold it is to feel that ambiguity in your palm, heavy, cool, strangely present. You cannot help but turn it over, align it with your gaze, and sense the face peering back. The cave itself, La Roche-Cotard, has been a site of layered discoveries: tools, hearths, fragments of bone, each testifying to the presence of Neanderthals along the river's edge. They lived there, cooked there, sharpened tools there. The cave walls hold their soot, and among all these ordinary remnants of survival lies the mask, utterly unnecessary, and yet perhaps more important than any blade or spear point, for what it represents is the dawning of imagination, the spark of recognition that a stone could be more than stone. Consider what it would mean for a Neanderthal to make a mask. Masks throughout human cultures are not casual things. They are bound to ritual, to story, to transformation. A mask allows one to step outside the self, to channel another being, another spirit, another presence. Was this fragment of flint used in such a way? Did it accompany some ancient ritual around a fire, held up to flickering flames that animated its empty eyes? Or was it a child's plaything, a curious face formed in stone and treasured simply because it looked familiar? We cannot know, but the possibilities themselves are startling. If the Mask of La Roche-Cotard is genuine in its interpretation as symbolic, then Neanderthals were capable of abstraction tens of thousands of years before Homo sapiens left their more famous marks in caves like Lascaux or Chauvet. It would mean that art, in its earliest stirrings, did not belong to us alone. It would mean that another species, long vanished, shared in the same restless desire to make meaning, to find the human in the inhuman. The stone itself bears the quiet testimony of time. Its flint surface is weathered, but the bone fragment lodged within has remained. The piercing that holds it is neat, unlikely to be the work of accident. It seems as though deliberate pressure, deliberate action, placed it there. One cannot help but imagine the hand that did it. Thick fingers, callous skin, steady movements shaped by long familiarity with stone. The Neanderthal who placed bone into flint may not have thought of themselves as an artist, may not have used that word at all. Yet the gesture is unmistakable. It was an act of making, of arranging the world into a new form. Archaeologists debate the interpretation still. Some insist it is nothing more than coincidence, that our eyes, so hungry for faces, see what is not there. After all, the human brain is wired for pareidolia, to find eyes in clouds, shapes in shadows, meaning in randomness. Could this simply be another trick of perception, an ordinary stone mistaken for art? Others counter that the placement of the bone, the shaping of the flint, are too precise to be random. The truth is likely to remain in suspense, for we cannot step back into that cave 75,000 years ago and watch. And yet perhaps the most powerful part of the Mask of La Roche-Cotard lies not in certainty, but in that very suspense. It is a reminder that the deep past resists our neat categories. We want to draw a line between tool and art, between utility and imagination, between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. But the mask blurs those lines. It suggests continuity rather than rupture, a shared ground of curiosity and creativity that extends far deeper than we once thought. Picture a Neanderthal fire glowing at the cave's mouth. The night outside is cold, the wind biting. Inside, figures gather, their voices low. One among them holds the mask. The firelight flickers against its surface, casting shadows into its hollowed eyes. In that moment, whether in ritual or in play, whether in awe or in amusement, the mask becomes more than stone. It becomes a bridge between the living and the imagined. Perhaps it was lifted to the face, held against the skin. Perhaps it was simply gazed upon, treasured as something unusual. Whatever the case, it meant something, and that meaning has survived in silence, carried forward across unthinkable spans of time, to reach us now. When we look at the Mask of La Roche-Cotard today, we are not only looking at stone, we are looking at ourselves, reflected back in the most distant of mirrors. It is not the smooth marble of Greece, nor the painted plaster of Egypt. It is raw, rough, elemental, and yet it holds the same impulse to shape the world into symbols, to see faces where there are none, to make meaning out of matter. The Loire still flows past the cave, as it has for tens of thousands of years. The river carries silt and memory alike, wearing its valley deeper with each passing season. The mask remains, lodged in its museum case, its hollow eyes unblinking. Visitors stop, lean in, squint, and whisper to one another. Some see the face immediately, others shake their heads, but all who stand before it feel the same quiet tug. The recognition that this is not just stone, but story, a story that began long before our own. And so the mask of La Roche-Cotard rests between worlds. It is part artifact, part question, part echo. It does not give answers, only invitations. Invitations to wonder what it means to be human, what it means to imagine, what it means to create. Perhaps in the end, that is its truest purpose, not to show us what Neanderthals were, but to remind us what we are. The mask stares back, and in its silent gaze we find both the depth of time and the spark of recognition. It is as though across 75,000 years, one hand reaches out to another, offering not a tool, not a weapon, but a fragment of imagination, preserved in stone. The Biblos syllabary. Imagine a set of bronze tablets, cool to the touch, heavy in the hand, their surfaces engraved with symbols that seem both familiar and strange. Some lines echo the shape of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Others look like early alphabetic characters. Still others resist comparison to anything we know. These are the Biblos syllabary tablets, an undeciphered writing system that may hold the key to understanding the missing link between the pictorial world of hieroglyphs and the linear world of alphabets. And yet, for nearly a century, they have kept their silence. Byblos, the coastal city in present-day Lebanon, is one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited places. People have lived there for over 7,000 years, trading, building, worshipping, writing. It was the port city where cedar wood was shipped to Egypt, where traders and scribes mingled, where languages crossed paths, and where scripts were adapted and reshaped. It was a city of crossroads, a place where writing itself may have been reinvented. When these bronze tablets came to light in the early 20th century, scholars realized they were holding something unprecedented. The engravings, cut with patient care into metal, did not belong to any known system. They were not Phoenician letters, not Egyptian hieroglyphs, not Akkadian cuneiform. And yet, traces of all three seemed to shimmer in their design. Some of the symbols looked like simplified drawings, a hand, a fish, a tree. Others looked abstract, reduced to straight lines and curves, as though someone were trying to compress ideas into a more efficient form. The first reaction was wonder. Could this be the missing bridge between the old pictorial scripts and the streamlined alphabets that would come to dominate the world? Could Byblos be the birthplace not only of Phoenician writing, but of writing as we know it? But wonder soon gave way to frustration. The script refused to yield. Despite decades of study, the Byblos syllabary has resisted decipherment. No bilingual inscription, no Rosetta Stone has been found to compare its symbols against. Scholars argue over whether the script represents syllables, consonants, or something else entirely. A few bold attempts at decipherment have been proposed, but none have been accepted by consensus, and so the tablets remain mute, their bronze surfaces reflecting the light but not revealing the words they hold. To imagine the world of the Byblos syllabary, we must step back into the Bronze Age. Around 2000 BCE, the eastern Mediterranean was alive with trade. Ships carried copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, ivory from Africa, lapis from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon, and grain from Egypt. This was a network of exchange, stretching across thousands of miles, and at its center stood cities like Byblos. For the Egyptians, Byblos was the gateway to the north. They called it Kebin, and their records show expeditions sent to secure its cedar wood, an invaluable resource for shipbuilding and temple construction. Egyptian inscriptions describe gifts of silver, gold, and wine sent to the rulers of Byblos, and in return, ships laden with cedar poles made their way south to the Nile. It was in this crucible of commerce that writing systems rubbed against one another. Egyptian scribes brought their hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian traders brought cuneiform, and the people of Byblos, situated at the intersection, may have decided to forge something new. The bronze tablets are small, portable, durable. They may have been used as teaching tools, lists, or records. Each symbol carved into them hints at a voice that once read them aloud. If they represent syllables, then each could have stood for a combination of sound and meaning. Imagine a script where the image of a fish might stand not only for the idea of a fish, but for the syllable phi, or p. Such a system would have allowed scribes to write faster, to capture speech more closely, to record trade deals, contracts, or stories in a way that was efficient yet still deeply connected to imagery. But how did such a script arise? Some scholars believe it was inspired by Egyptian hieratic, a cursive form of hieroglyphs used for everyday writing. Others see traces of Mesopotamian influence. Still others believe it was an indigenous invention, born of necessity in a bustling trading city where multiple languages mingled. Byblos may have been a linguistic workshop where scribes experimented with ways to reduce the complexity of older systems while retaining enough flexibility to capture speech. The tablets, however, raise more questions than they answer. How many symbols did the script contain? Some count around 90 distinct signs, which suggests a syllabary more complex than an alphabet but more streamlined than hieroglyphs. Others argue for a different classification, proposing that it may have been a consonantal syllabary, a transitional form leaning toward the later Phoenician alphabet. If that is true, then the Byblos syllabary represents the evolutionary step between pictures and letters, a bridge we have long suspected but rarely glimpsed. Still, without a bilingual key, we cannot be sure. Scholars have tried to match the inscriptions against known languages of the region, Semitic tongues like early Phoenician, Amorite, or Canaanite. Some claim to detect patterns resembling those languages, but the interpretations remain controversial. A handful of researchers even suggested connections to unrelated scripts, reaching far for parallels, though such theories often collapse under scrutiny. Yet the mystery persists, and the silence of the Byblos syllabary only adds to its allure. Each time a new photograph of the tablets is published, researchers comb through the engravings again, searching for a pattern missed before. Each time, hope rises that perhaps one symbol can be linked to a known word, that one inscription may contain a repetition that can unlock the code, but the tablets keep their secrets, as if mocking our efforts. It is worth pausing to imagine the hand that carved them. A scribe, sitting in a workshop in Byblos perhaps 4,000 years ago, pressing the sharp tip of a stylus into bronze, carefully forming lines and curves. Perhaps he learned from an older master, passing on the shapes of signs that were already ancient in his time. Perhaps he worked quickly, recording a transaction, or slowly, composing something ceremonial. The weight of the tablet in his hands would have been reassuring, the permanence of bronze ensuring that the words would outlast him. He may have believed he was writing something important, something that needed to be remembered, and in a way he was right, for even though we cannot read his words, they endure. His marks outlasted kingdoms, wars, and empires. They outlasted the Phoenician alphabet, which itself gave birth to Greek, Latin, and all the scripts of Europe. They outlasted the rise and fall of Byblos as a great trading hub. Today the tablets rest in museum collections, silent but radiant, their surfaces etched with the stubbornness of memory. If the Byblos syllabary could be deciphered, the reward would be immense. We might discover the earliest form of alphabetic writing. We might gain insight into the daily life of Byblos, its trade, its rulers, its rituals. We might uncover stories, prayers, or contracts written in a voice long forgotten. Decipherment could illuminate the missing chapter in the history of writing, showing us how humans made the leap from pictures to phonetic symbols. But perhaps their silence is also part of their power. In refusing to yield, they remind us that history is not complete. For every text we can read, there are others that lie just beyond our reach, whispering in shapes we cannot yet understand. The Byblos syllabary stands as a reminder that writing is not inevitable. It is invented, reinvented, adapted, and sometimes lost. Scripts can emerge, flourish, and vanish, leaving behind only traces that puzzle us. As we look at these tablets today, under the cool lights of a museum, we see more than symbols. We see the persistence of human curiosity, the need to record, to communicate, to leave something behind. We see the fragility of memory, the way languages shift and scripts die. And we see the beauty of mystery itself. The Byblos syllabary remains an unsolved riddle pressed into bronze, a message suspended between silence and speech, waiting for the day when someone, somewhere, may finally hear its voice. And until then, the tablets remain what they have always been, signs that connect us to an ancient world, an unbroken chain of human hands marking surfaces, striving to capture the fleeting breath of language and make it endure. The La Venta colossal heads. In the lowlands of southern Mexico, where rivers braid through lush green plains and the humid air carries the thick fragrance of tropical blooms, there stands one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient world. It is not a pyramid that climbs toward the heavens, nor a temple filled with painted gods. Instead, it is something simpler, yet infinitely more haunting. Faces carved into stone, faces so immense that they dwarf the human body, faces that seem to gaze from a time before memory itself. These are the colossal heads of La Venta, the most iconic works of the Olmec civilization. The Olmecs, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, lived more than 3,000 years ago, long before the Maya built their stepped pyramids, and long before the Aztecs raised their temples above the valley lakes. Yet what they left behind has the strange weight of eternity. At La Venta, a ceremonial center on an island of land rising slightly above the marshes, the Olmecs arranged their world of gods and rulers, of offerings and mysteries. and at the heart of it, they placed these monumental heads, enormous, solemn, and deeply human. Each head was carved from a single block of basalt, hauled across miles of river and jungle. Some stand nearly 3 meters high. The largest weigh over 20 tons. And when you stand before one, you cannot help but feel the gaze of an ancient people peering through the stone across the centuries. What is striking is their individuality. Each head seems to represent a specific person, perhaps a ruler or a revered ancestor. The faces are not generic. They bear wide noses, fleshy lips, deeply set eyes, furrowed brows. Some wear helmets or headdresses. Each is unique, suggesting portraits of power rather than abstract symbols. These are not gods imagined. They are people remembered, and yet their names are lost. Imagine the scene thousands of years ago. In the swampy lands near the Gulf of Mexico, hundreds of men strain at ropes and levers, moving a basalt boulder quarried from the distant Tuxtla Mountains, over 70 miles away. The stone is dragged across terrain that alternates between dense rainforest and sucking marsh, transported perhaps on rafts along winding rivers, inching closer to La Venta. The labor is immense, the willpower almost unimaginable, and all of this enormous human effort, is for a single piece of rock, which will then be shaped, chiseled, and transformed into a face. But not just any face, a face that would endure through ages, a face that would anchor memory itself. For the Olmecs, power was not only lived, it was immortalized in stone. When archaeologists uncovered the colossal heads in the 20th century, they found them arranged within La Venta's ceremonial precinct, sometimes deliberately buried, sometimes aligned with mounds and plazas. Some were found in situ, standing where ritual life once unfolded. Others had been moved, reburied, as if given a second life in new settings. This deliberate treatment suggests they were not mere decorations but active participants in the sacred landscape. One wonders, did the Olmecs believe the stone itself carried the spirit of the ruler depicted? Did these heads serve as eternal guardians, watching over processions, offerings, or the cosmic order itself? The helmets carved on many of the heads invite further mystery. Some scholars believe they represent battle gear, suggesting that these were warrior kings, remembered as protectors. Others suggest they are ballgame helmets, linking the rulers to the sacred Mesoamerican ballgame, a ritual contest tied to life, death, and the cosmos. Still others see them as ceremonial headdresses, symbols of rank and authority. Each interpretation shifts the meaning of the heads, yet none is certain. And what of their expressions? Some heads appear stern, their brows knit in concentration. Others appear almost serene, gazing outward with quiet dignity. One even seems to smirk, as though its subject knew some private truth. To stand among them is to be surrounded by a silent council, each stone face offering a different emotion, yet none revealing its full story. Archaeologists date the La Venta heads to around 900–400 BCE, but the tradition of colossal heads began earlier, at San Lorenzo, another Olmec center, where the first of these massive portraits were carved. When San Lorenzo fell, its monuments were sometimes defaced or reburied, and the cultural center shifted to La Venta. There the tradition reached its height, culminating in the majestic heads that still arrest us today. The sheer effort of their creation speaks volumes about Olmec society. To quarry, transport, and sculpt such stones required centralized authority, labor organization, and a shared belief in the importance of monumental art. The heads are testaments not only to individuals remembered, but to the collective power of a civilization that could marshal such resources. Yet for all their grandeur, the Olmecs left behind no deciphered writing system to tell us their names or stories. A few symbols survive, etched into artifacts, perhaps proto-writing, but not enough to unlock their full history. So we are left with the faces. Silent, eternal, ambiguous. They ask questions we cannot yet answer. Consider the scale of symbolism. In many cultures, kings and rulers built pyramids, palaces, or vast cities to assert their power. The Olmecs, instead, carved portraits so large they became monuments themselves. It is as though memory itself was made solid, as though a ruler's presence could be carved into the landscape for all time. And yet perhaps even the Olmecs could not foresee how long these heads would last. For centuries after their civilization faded, jungle reclaimed La Venta, trees grew, roots wrapped around stone, earth buried what was once sacred space. Local villagers stumbled upon the heads long before archaeology arrived, marveling at these strange visages rising from the soil. When excavations began in the 1940s and 1950s, archaeologists were struck by their artistry. The heads were not crude, they were masterfully carved, with smooth surfaces, proportional features, and a keen attention to detail. Despite the limitations of stone tools, the sculptors achieved a realism and presence that rivaled many later traditions. The craftsmanship itself is evidence of a sophisticated artistic culture, one whose other works have mostly vanished, save for jade figurines and ceremonial axes. Yet the heads remain, There are 17 known Olmec colossal heads, spread across several sites, but the Leventa examples are among the finest. Together they create a panorama of ancient faces, each heavy with unspoken meaning. What strikes the modern visitor most is the paradox of familiarity and strangeness. The heads are human, deeply so, recognizably individual, and yet they come from a world so distant that their context has dissolved. We see the faces, but not the lives. We feel their gaze, but not their words. It is as though memory itself has been severed, leaving only the stone portraits to remind us of what once was. And so, standing before them, one cannot help but wonder, who were these people? Were they kings, warriors, priests? Did they rule by fear or by wisdom? Did the people who carved their images look upon them with reverence, pride, or perhaps obligation? Did the rulers themselves ever imagine that their likenesses would endure for 3 millennia, long after their cities crumbled? There is something timeless in the act of portraiture. To carve a likeness is to resist oblivion, and that is what the Olmecs achieved. They captured not just a generic face, but the weight of presence, the reality of personhood. In that sense, the colossal heads are not only monuments, they are immortal companions, still keeping watch over the land where they once held power. As night settles over Leventa, the jungle grows quiet. The cries of birds fade, the hum of insects rises. The moon drapes silver light across the ancient mounds and plazas. And in that stillness, the heads remain, faces of stone, eyes unblinking, lips silent, yet heavy with memory. They do not tell us their names, they do not whisper their stories, and yet by their sheer endurance they remind us that even in silence humanity leaves its trace. The colossal heads of Leventa are not merely archaeological artifacts, they are conversations with time itself, conversations that remain unfinished, waiting for someone to listen deeply enough to hear what cannot be spoken, and so they endure, patient, eternal, enigmatic, watching as centuries pass, as the world shifts around them, as questions multiply but answers remain just out of reach. Faces in stone, memories of power, the unbroken gaze of an ancient people who, across 3,000 years, still meet our eyes. The Vinča figurines. Under the soil of southeastern Europe, where rivers snake gently through valleys, and the seasons shift with ancient rhythm, there once lived a people who left behind more questions than answers. Their traces remain not in towering palaces, nor in grand tombs of kings, but in small clay bodies, mysterious figures that stare back at us with wide, haunting eyes. These are the Vinča figurines, silent idols of the first farmers, crafted some 7,000 years ago. Their world was quiet compared to ours, built on steady cycles of sowing and harvest, birth and death, ritual and silence. Yet from their hands came objects that feel strangely alive, as if they carry whispers of thoughts too fragile to survive the centuries. The Vinča culture, which flourished between roughly 5700 and 4500 BCE in what is now Serbia and the Balkans, is considered one of Europe's earliest farming civilizations. They raised crops, kept animals, and built settlements of surprising size. But what sets them apart is their art. Thousands of fired clay figurines, carved with patterns, etched with signs, and always bearing those wide, piercing eyes. If you were to walk into one of their settlements, perhaps along the Danube, you would hear the soft sound of flint scraping against bone, the hum of voices speaking in a language long forgotten, the crackle of fire warming pots of grain, and scattered among these humble homes, you would find clay, worked carefully, shaped into little bodies. Some resemble women, with accentuated hips and breasts, symbols of fertility perhaps. Others look more abstract, their forms triangular or angular, their faces mask-like, etched with strange lines. Some have arms folded tightly, as if guarding secrets. Some have patterns on their chests or foreheads, symbols that archaeologists cannot fully decipher. What were they for? That is the question that turns the Vinča figurines into more than simple toys or decorations. They are silent, but their silence feels heavy, purposeful. Scholars have debated for decades. Were they idols of gods, worshipped in small rituals within the home? Were they charms for fertility, mothers holding them close when hoping for children? Or did they represent ancestors, clay vessels through which the living stayed connected to the dead? Then there is another layer of mystery. Among the Vinča artifacts are not only figurines but also tablets inscribed with signs. Some believe these scratches might represent the earliest form of writing in the world, predating Sumer and Egypt by 1,000 years. If this is true, then these quiet farmers were not merely planting seeds in their fields, but also planting the seeds of written human thought. The figurines, with their markings, could then be more than art. They might be messages, words frozen in clay, sentences meant for gods, or generations that never came to be. Imagine one of these figurines fresh from the fire of an ancient hearth. The clay is still warm, its edges darkened from smoke. A woman of the Vinča culture turns it in her hand, looking at the lines she carved. Maybe they mean something only to her family, a private symbol of safety or life. Maybe it is meant to be placed in the earth, buried beneath a doorway, protecting the house from spirits. Or maybe it is held in ceremonies, touched by many hands, its surface polished by years of reverence. And then, one day, it slips from history, buried by flood or fire, or the collapse of the house. Thousands of years later, an archaeologist uncovers it, brushes off the soil, and finds the same eyes staring back. The effect of those eyes is uncanny. They are not simply round holes, they are deliberate, exaggerated, often triangular or almond-shaped, sometimes with a deep gaze that feels almost alien. Some researchers have noted their resemblance to masks, suggesting that the figurines might have represented not just people, but beings transformed, shamans in trance, ancestors half-remembered, or spirits seen between waking and dream. It is a reminder that for these early farmers, the line between the natural and the supernatural was thin. Their villages, too, were extraordinary for their time. Some Vinča settlements were home to thousands, making them among the largest in Neolithic Europe. They lived in orderly houses, built from wood and clay, arranged in rows that hint at planning, at a sense of community. Beneath floors and in pits, figurines were hidden, as if the very soil needed to hold them. It is tempting to think that life revolved around these objects, not in the way our lives revolve around phones or tools, but as anchors of belief, symbols that held the fragile threads of their world together. The figurines also speak of hands, thousands of hands, shaping clay. Each figure is unique, yet they share enough traits to feel part of one language. Some wear what looks like jewelry, necklaces carved into their chests. Some seem to wear robes or skirts, the folds etched in careful strokes. A few appear to sit on thrones, suggesting hierarchy, perhaps leaders or deities. And then there are those with bird-like faces, elongated heads, or bodies so abstract they seem less human than something in between. Were these creatures of myth? Spirits of crops, animals, or the rivers they depended on? Even now, when we hold them in museums, we feel a pull. They are small, easily fitting in a hand, yet they radiate presence. Some scholars have compared them to portable shrines, tiny embodiments of power. Their silence is not empty. It presses against us, urging us to imagine, and yet, for all their mystery, they are deeply human. The clay is simple earth, taken from riverbanks, shaped by fingers, hardened by fire. Their creators were not kings or priests in temples, but farmers, potters, mothers, fathers, people who lived by the rhythm of the seasons, who worried about weather and harvest, who buried their dead and told stories by firelight. They made these figures because they needed to, because their world demanded symbols, connections, bridges to the unseen. As centuries passed, the Vinča culture faded, their settlements were abandoned, their fields emptied, the figurines lay forgotten, resting in the soil. Only in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were they rediscovered, their strange forms puzzling archaeologists. Some called them fertility idols. Others saw them as evidence of a goddess cult, an early mother religion. Some even speculated on extraterrestrial influence, so alien do their faces appear. But the truth is, we may never know, and perhaps that is fitting. Their silence is their gift. The Vinča figurines invite us not to solve them, but to sit with them, to let their stillness draw us into a slower rhythm. They are not loud monuments or grand inscriptions of kings. They are whispers, clay whispers, from people who lived 7,000 years ago. Their world is gone, but in their wide eyes we see something of our own, searching. Our desire to mark meaning in the fragile span of human life. So when you picture them, resting now in glass cases or deep in museum vaults, imagine too the fires that once baked them, the hands that once smoothed their clay. Imagine the silence of a Vinča night, the crackle of hearths, the hum of crickets, the soft voices telling stories we will never hear. And in that stillness, the figurines keep watching. They are not solved, not explained. They are simply there, silent idols of the first farmers, guardians of a mystery that has outlasted millennia. And perhaps that is enough. Have you ever wondered what secrets still lie buried, waiting to be uncovered? Thank you for joining us tonight on Unearthed Secrets, where history whispers through stone, clay, and silence. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Until next time, may the mysteries of the past keep you curious, and may your night be filled with quiet dreams. Good night.